Rest for the Wicked was without question one of my favorite games of 2024, which reminds me, I never even got around to making a list of my favorite releases for that year. Probably too late now, but you know, maybe something to plan for the end of 2025. Anyway, yeah, dude, even in its incomplete early access form, like I really enjoyed my time with this game. I played somewhere around 70 hours in total, and honestly the only reason I stopped was because I had other stuff that I wanted to play, but I definitely still could have got another run in, trying a different character build or whatever. But you know, given its early access and I knew updates were coming, I thought it was fine to take a break. And great news for me, or maybe bad news depending, but just the fact that my schedule is gonna be so damn full this month. But good news for the fact that I'm looking forward to this. Got the perfect excuse to jump back in just a few weeks, as Mood Studios is releasing a massive update for the game with loads of new content and features, brand new areas, new enemies, continuous storyline, new bosses, additional replayability options, bunch of quality of life improvements, including some improved performance. This is looking really darn good. Can't wait. Let's dive into all the details. So a couple weeks ago, Moon Studios released what was a 25-minute showcase going in depth about this upcoming update. And they actually opened up the video discussing why it took a little longer than they expected for them to release this update. The TLDR of which being that their original publisher, Private Division, was sold off by their parent company, Take-Two Interactive, back in November 2024. And while this reorganization was taking place, Moon Studios then offered to purchase the rights to the game for self-publishing it going forward. This process took months of negotiation, but eventually their proposal was accepted. Now, this obviously caused a delay in them releasing the forthcoming Breach update, but it also means that going forward, Moon Studios is now 100% fully independent. They don't have anyone to answer to but themselves, which should theoretically give them a whole lot more freedom and flexibility, which then should, in theory, be good for the future of this game and their update cadence, and just the fact that they don't have to, they literally don't have to answer to anybody about anything anymore. So we'll see how it all pans out. But the business stuff aside, let's get into checking out the update and all the juicy good bits that come along with it. So this is titled The Breach. It is the biggest content and feature update the game has received since initially entering early access in April 2024. And with this comes more of absolutely everything. More continuation of the story, more new zones, new enemies, bosses, loot, and a host of brand new systems and features being added. So for starters, the narrative campaign is being expanded with new cutscenes, dialogue, and a story that takes you into two entirely new regions, the Lowland Meadows and the Marin Woods. Now these new zones are massive, both of them effectively doubling the game's total explorable play space. In these areas, they've continued the philosophy of their level design being entirely handcrafted with no procedural elements to create this expansive and interactive open world where every inch of the space matters. They've also continued adding a lot of verticality to these levels, which a lot of times leads to various secrets and hidden loot all over the place. These regions come with a new enemy faction as well as new enemy types, each with their own unique attack patterns, strengths, and weaknesses. They showcased a few examples. So there's the Timber Wraith, who swings a great axe in massive arcs. There's the Wretches and Archers, who shoot arrows and have arms that extend to strike from a distance. You got this Rust Weaver with two massive saws that they slam into the ground and whirl around, or the Corpse Treader, who wields this buzzsaw and then also has this tail that he can use to elevate himself into the air and slam to the ground. And you got these humanoid bird-like creatures that will call in reinforcements if you don't take them down quickly enough. Now, if you've not played this game yet, it is very much so a Souls-like combat in the sense that it really requires you to pay close attention and learn how enemies move and attack so that you can avoid being hit and you can counter when opportunity arises. It's definitely not the type of action game that you can like mindlessly spam attacks. This isn't the sort of ARPG where you're screen clearing like what you get, for example, in Endgame, Last Epoch, or Path of Exile, or Diablo 4. No, you gotta be methodical and you have to pay attention. Even the simplest enemies can kill you in just a couple of hits, so you have to react to their moves. You have to avoid getting hit, whether that's blocking or dodging or just spacing, and then you need to counter when the enemies are in recovery. If you don't do that, if you just spam it, if you think you're gonna be screen clearing, you're just gonna die a lot. That's plain and simple. It's definitely not an easy game, but I have found combat very, very satisfying. It's a whole chunk of the reason why I enjoy playing this game, besides the exploration and discovery, which they do a great job with the like elevation and the verticality and things being hidden around corners and all sorts of stuff. That and the combat and the atmosphere. Again, one of my favorite games of 2024, but well, let's continue. Also with the new content comes a brand new town hub in the Marin area called Marin Village. Here you're gonna find vendors selling different items from those sold in the game's initial village, as well as various NPCs that have dialogue options, continuing the story, and various side quests for you to complete. They've also added 2 new weapon types to the game. These are the gauntlets and wands. So gauntlets look to provide a melee brawler playstyle. You're literally like boxing and or wrestling enemies with this weapon. So in addition to the base game that had the suplex ability, you can now also drop kick enemies as well. Gauntlets have this attack that basically looks like a Hadouken, where you shoot out this ball of energy. Looks like they've also got this whirlwind style spinning attack and this thing called Tremor Wave, where you smash the ground and it deals damage in a straight line, basically upheaving the earth. And then as for wands, this is a new type of magical ranged weapon, although they've only shown a couple of attacks here that looked to be iced base spells and abilities, such as Ice Darts, which is just a basic range projectile that will freeze enemies. But then there's also this thing, I think it's called Cold Sling. It's an evasive move where you actually leap backwards, spinning in the air multiple times, tossing out a new projectile with each rotation that you do. This thing looks really, really cool. They showcased a few other spells that are coming to the game, including this Plague Attack, where you summon an area of corruption on the ground that explodes after a few seconds, or Lightning Bolt, which calls down a strike that looks to deal massive damage in an area. Now, in addition to that new content coming, the new areas, the new enemies, the new weapons and spells, they've also made a lot of improvements to replayability of the game across the board. So after you play through the new story and go through the new zones that are added in the Breach, prior zones in the rest of the game can now then become overtaken by Pestilence, which is a new mechanic that will revamp the region. So when an area is infected, it becomes overrun with an entirely new set of enemies. These enemies, besides providing a new combat challenge, will also drop a new resource type called Torn. So any Torn resources that you find can then be burnt in any of the fires you come across in the world, and burning these Torn resources will then further bump up the difficulty of enemies in that area. So the more Torn resource you burn, the harder enemies become, and with all of that increased challenge comes better rewards, with enemies dropping high-end loot, currency, and resources. Now, as you progress through these pestilence-infected zones, killing enemies, you can notice this bar at the bottom of pestilence spread, and that's going to slowly deplete. Once this is empty, you then get a plague boss summoned in that region, and overcoming that encounter will cleanse the pestilence from the zone, at least for a time, because presumably they can come back. It'll likely be on like a rotating schedule. An area gets infected, you go, you cleanse it, it's cleansed, and then you go to another area, you cleanse that, and maybe the first area gets re-infested or something. I don't know exactly how to work, but something like that I would assume. Also adding replayability with this update is the fact that they've extended a lot of areas in the base game. They've added many new explorable spaces, corridors, rooms, and more to each of the original zones. So you're going to want to be poking around, even if you've already played this game for 70 plus hours like myself. Looks like there's going to be a whole lot new spaces in the areas that we've already seen. Now on to some systems and theory crafting update. For starters, they have revamped how loot drops work. So instead of the prior method, where there were different tiers of gear that would drop based on the zone as well as the difficulty level that you were on, now the entire pool of all the loot in the game always has a chance to drop, with items then scaling to your current character level. This, in my opinion, is actually a fantastic change, because in the past there were certain weapons that were good in the end game that wouldn't drop by the time you actually reached the end game, as they would only drop in like early zones and levels. And these weapons you could scale up in their power, but they would have particular movesets or particular built-in skills. And if there were weapons that you liked in that early game portion that you would carry into the end game and upgrade, you would just never get them dropping as you progress through the game. So in order to farm those items, what you would actually have to do is start a brand new world save file, then rerunning the early portions of the game with your higher level character. I did this myself multiple times as I was farming for certain weapons that I liked. For example, there was this one-handed hammer that had a weapon throw ability that was super strong and some base stats that I really liked, but it literally would not drop on my endgame character in my endgame save file because the world had leveled up to the point where it was no longer in the loot table. It would just never drop. So like I said, I would have to start a new save file and then farm the early portion of the game in a different world save over and over again to get the item to eventually drop. This new approach, in my opinion, way better. They've also reworked how the enchanting system system works. This is basically how you boost up weapons, giving them modifiers. Now they've added more flexibility and customization, as you can spend Fallen Embers to add a new enchantment or re-roll any existing enchantments on any piece of gear. Awesome change. There's also now a new highly customizable loot variant called Masterwork items. So these pieces of gear will drop as common items, but you can then infuse them with gems, and each gem is going to tell you exactly the specific stat and perk that you're looking for. This basically lets you custom make gear with the exact stats and bonuses that you want. Then in addition to all of this, there are a ton of new weapons, runes, and enchantments, as well as armor sets that have been added to the loot table. They've also buffed shields, as based on their data, they found that this was an underused item. So now, instead of blocking draining stamina, the effectiveness of a shield is going to be based entirely on the poise and stagger stats. And then finally, they've added a new mode, Hardcore. It's what you expect. Like other games, this is going to present you with the challenge of having a single life with permadeath for a character. Although if you die, the character isn't deleted. Instead, it will then be migrated from Hardcore to only be allowed to play on normal servers. But if you want to play on hardcore servers, you only get one life for the character. So again, it's just a nice little challenge. Now on to quality of life and polish updates. Quite a bit here. They've improved storage and inventory management, namely by increasing the max item stack size from what was 25 now to 99. So we should need far fewer, 1/4 I guess to be exact, the number of chests in our homes. And yeah, this was a problem. I had like basically the entire floor of my house in town was just filled with storage chests. So this is a great addition. They've added these new items called Whisper Stones. These are basically teleportation platforms that can be placed in your home, allowing you to fast travel to and from them directly. Whereas in the past, you could only teleport to town and then would have to run to your house anytime you wanted to access your storage. Now you can just you can teleport from the world directly to your home, drop off items, and then go back out to the world. They've made adjustments to town progression. So there are still timers for upgrading each of the various buildings and vendors in a town, but these timers can now be sped up by contributing additional materials. So this is interesting. This is one mechanic that I've actually seen people complaining about a lot, but I was never really bothered by. People just seem to really dislike that the game has any timers, maybe because it reminds them of bad mobile games or pay-to-win PC games. You know, in those instances, you can spend real money to skip the timers, but that's not what this is. Like, it's just a in-game mechanic. I think there's two reasons they likely have it. For one, immersion related, right? Because the idea being the people in the town are physically building these upgrades. They're actually like the cook is expanding. They're doing construction on their house, and that takes time. Now in the game, it's like 30 minutes, and then it's like a couple hours, and then 4 hours, and then 12. It's some scaling. It gets harder and harder, or longer and longer the further the upgrades. But part of this, the reason they did this most certainly is like immersion related, because they're actually building this stuff. You can physically see the construction process as it's happening, from a basic little hut into a nice little cooking dwelling into this like mansion or whatever, right? So I'm pretty sure that's part of the reason they've gone with this timer thing. But then the other part of it is probably just a way to spread out the progressions, so that people aren't burning through things quickly, bring in the resources, and then just upgrading all the way to the highest tier. Yeah, I've never really gotten the outrage personally. The timers didn't really bother me. There's no monetization tied to it whatsoever. I really think it's just mainly immersion related. Like, that was their design philosophy. I guess alternatively, if people continue to be bothered by this, beyond the change that they just made where you can speed up the timers by fueling more resources, maybe they just make it take longer to farm the amount of resources that you want for each upgrade and then remove the timer aspect entirely. I don't know. Again, as far as I'm concerned, it's literally just like, you've got characters in this town. They are physically building these locations. It's not just you give them the wood and then the shop instantly pops up. I know from a video game perspective, that is a very common way to do it. I get why they did it this way. I don't think they plan to monetize it in the future. It's not the vibe that I'm getting here anyways. One thing I'm very happy about as well when it comes to some improvements is they've made some big performance improvements, mentioning that they have continued optimization and making things better here on multiple fronts, saying that just about everyone should notice drastically improved performance if you ever had performance issues in the past. Now, one big thing worth noting with this update is that all of this new content is going to require a brand new fresh playthrough. They say that the old server saves are going to remain on a legacy build. So if you played the game in the past and you have a character and a world save that you've took part in, that stuff isn't getting deleted. But if you want to play through everything that is being added with the breach, you are going to have to start a fresh playthrough, and I believe a fresh character. I'm not certain. They at least least the world save has to be started over. I'm not sure about the character. And that either way, that's going to bum some people out for sure. Now, they said basically that this was simply a result of the massive number of changes and additions, but also the fact that they've not only added new areas and all the new stuff, but they've made so many adjustments to the base game that it basically required them to separate the save files here. Now, if this bothers you, I guess at least if we're trying to look on the bright side, they have added a ton of new areas to what was the base game, a whole bunch of new explorable space. So there should be fresh content to see in those areas from your original playthrough, at least if you're running through it again. New stuff for you to explore and look for. I don't know. I'm fine starting things over. Like, I'm used to, for example, the seasonal content of ARPGs, so it's not like a big deal for me, but I can understand why some people might be bothered. Like, if you played for 50 hours and you wanted to just keep playing with your character to check out the new stuff, it looks like that might not be possible. Although, again, I'm still not certain if they have because there's your character, which is separate from the world. You can take your character to multiple world saves, but I don't know. It might still be that you have to start a fresh character and a fresh world. I'm just not sure yet. It wasn't particularly clear from what they said in this video. Okay, so that is the overview of all the new stuff coming in the Breach update specifically. What's next? Well, following the release of this update, Moon Studios has said that they intend to be very active and responsive with hotfixes and patches going forward, addressing any player concerns and issues. And I believe them, because if you recall, I do, they had an insane patch pasting at the time post the initial early access launch. Like, we got 6 hotfixes in the first 2 weeks of this game that addressed a lot of big issues, followed then by 2 major patches in the following month addressing some of the bigger issues that took time for them to fix. And now that they're fully independent, as we mentioned earlier, presumably this means they're going to be able to be even more active and responsive, which, okay, great. Looking forward to it. Now, they did also address in the video the highly sought after multiplayer co-op mode, which unfortunately enough, I have to tell you, it's not coming right away in the Breach update. They did say that it's going to be the very next thing in the pipeline, which they plan to release sometime shortly after the Breach comes out, but no, co-op is not coming with the Breach update later this month. Now, originally in the early access roadmap, multiplayer was actually supposed to be added prior to the Breach. They had their first update for the Crucible, then multiplayer, then the Breach. Like, that was the order of planned updates in their roadmap. However, what they said is they instead decided to focus on adding as much new content to this update as possible, so that when the co-op is added later on, there's going to be a lot more new stuff for people to play, which I guess makes sense, although depending on how long it takes them to release the co-op update after the Breach comes out, many people might already be done with all of the new content in the Breach, and then we'll put the game back down until the following big content update comes. Yeah, I mean, I guess it could either way be the same problem. Like, if they release the Breach and then co-op doesn't come for a month later, most people will likely be done playing the Breach, and then just adding co-op, they'll be like, well, yeah, I could play co-op, but it's already good, the new stuff, so I'll wait till the next big update. So I don't know, they could just end up in the very same situation, depending on the gap between the Breach and the co-op and then the update after the Breach, but we'll just have to see how it all pans out. And frankly, despite that, I still think this update looks fantastic. It's set to release on April 30th, and I cannot wait. Definitely going to be diving back in. I also want to make note here, by the way, if you're like me and you've not played this game since its original release in early 2024, they have had one other update. So actually back in July of last year, they released the Crucible patch, which brought a pretty big overhaul to endgame, specifically to the Crucible itself, which, if you don't recall, this is the farmable sort of roguelike dungeon that's meant for endgame progression. Now, during the initial release, this was fairly bare bones. You'd go through several rooms and then you fight a boss at the end, and those rooms would be kind of procedurally ordered, so you wouldn't know which room you'd get when, but those rooms were also always the same every time, the same enemies in the same positions. You just don't know, you wouldn't know which room was your first, second, third, fourth, fifth room all the way up to the boss, but every time you went to a room, you knew exactly how it was spaced, the enemies and everything within it. Well, that has changed, because this update, once again, that happened in July of last year, completely fleshed out the end game. They more than tripled the number of randomized chambers within the Crucible, as well as introduced an entirely new art theme, added a brand new vendor and a new gameplay system called Echoes, and this is pretty cool. Echoes allow you to customize every run with a huge variety of buffs and effects, which is just basically like the traditional roguelike mechanic, where throughout the course of a run, you are presented with a random assortment of powerful buffs. You pick the buff that you want to enhance your character, and then as you progress, you accumulate more of these, which lead ideally to some crazy overpowered potential combos. This is part of the fun of the roguelike, getting big power boost as you move through a run, which gets reset, and then you do it over again. Always random, the assortment of powers that you get to choose from. They also added a new vendor, the Seneschal, which in exchange for Gloam Seeds, which is a currency dropped by enemies within the Crucible, he then sells you Fallen Embers, which are always highly valuable, even more so now with the enchantment changes that they're introducing in the Breach. He also sells Refined Resources, the ability to Exalt, which is an improvement form for your weapons, and then unlocks some new features in the Crucible as well. There's also the addition of a new enemy faction, the Gloam, who are lost souls that became infected by Pestilence, giving them this kind of corrupted bioluminescence. These guys look really cool. And access to the Crucible is actually now unlocked a whole lot earlier in the game, essentially right after you first arrive in Sacrament and you complete the first campaign quest. You can then jump into an early iteration of the Crucible. And then beyond all of those Crucible specific changes, they had a few updates for the base game as well. They extended some regions of the overworld, in particular the Black Trench and Nameless Pass got more secrets, surprises, and additional areas to discover. And they updated combat with some enhanced kill effects. So for example, enemies will now actually physically explode when killed by fireballs, or they will shatter into a million pieces after being frozen and smashed. And you can just absolutely blow people to smithereens with big heavy weapon attacks as well. They have the addition of stray animals into the game, so you can find cats and dogs you will come across and are able to pet. And this update brought an initial round of major performance enhancements, specifically including CPU performance improvements, smoother area transitions, a cinematic polish overhaul, and memory optimization. Also, with this patch, the game was finally Steam Deck verified. And that is just about everything. We got all of this new stuff coming with the Breach later this month, along with everything that was added in the Crucible that I've yet to play, both of which I'm pumped to check out. Like, I am ready to jump back into No Rest for the Wicked. There's still much more to be added as well. So prior to them reaching 1.0 and fully launching, we know that they have the planned inclusion of the 4-player multiplayer co-op, which supposedly will be coming sometime after the Breach, hopefully soon. We also know the game is going to be getting multiplayer PvP, and that is something that I'm really looking forward, especially with this game's combat system. The idea of having PvP in any form, whether it's a Souls-like invasion system or just like structured PvP in an arena. Either way, the combat in this game is phenomenal, so PvPing is going to be a lot of fun. I'm so excited. And if there's multiplayer PvP, like the co-op plus PvP, can we have like 4v4 arena PvP? I'm really excited for the PvP, probably even more so than the cooperative PvE, to be honest. Of course, they're going to continue expanding the story content, adding new chapters. With this will come additional map regions, along with all the expected inclusions, new enemies, bosses, weapons, and gear. And pretty soon, they're going to be adding farming, apparently. Like I'm talking planting and growing crops. That's going to be part of like the base management stuff. So lots of cool stuff. Like I said, this game was a blast even in its initial iteration. I played for 70 hours and the game was far from complete. Seems it's just getting even better. Quite looking forward to jumping back in. That does it for today though. Thank you for watching this video. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Are you as excited for this update as I am? Are you planning on jumping back in? Are you going to wait for the full 1.0, which I don't blame people. You know, early access is a funny thing because for me, as long as I have a fun time playing a game, I make my purchase, I play the game. If I enjoy myself, I'm pretty satisfied. But I also understand the philosophy of people wanting to wait until a game is in its final iteration. Although I think I'm just kind of disillusioned with that in general because so much of my gaming history is like MMOs and live service games, which are never in their final iteration. They're always getting expanded upon and improved. So maybe that's why I'm fine with early access games, because as long as the exchange is money for entertainment, and if I give you money and I get entertainment and I'm happy enough with it, I'm good. But anyways, I feel like this is an entirely separate video that I should just make at some point, like the philosophy behind early access. My thoughts on early access is a scam. That's probably a better title. That's it for today. Thank you so much. Let me know what you think about No Rest for the Wicked, this update. Anything, just chat below. Let me know. It's great for the algorithm. All right. Thanks, guys, for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you all next time. Take it easy.